Steve was a really fun guy to hang around with, says David Fox, a bartender at Geo's, a Winnipeg gay bar where Yablonski performed. He's there pretty much every day of the week. Yablonski was set to compete in one of the city's biggest drag competitions, organized by the Snowy Owl Monarchist Society. Yablonski, who is in his early 20s, grew up in Fraserwood, Manitoba, a small town 50 kilometers north of Winnipeg. He worked as a cook at the Pizza Hut in downtown Winnipeg, around the corner from Geo's. At karaoke nights, he was known for his beautiful singing voice. Unless there was something stopping him, says Fox, he was always here. Steven Yablonski was known as a Canadian drag performer who had competed in several popular alternative entertainment pageants across Canada under the stage name Kerri O'Kee. You could hear the emotion in her voice as Shandy Strong recalled, "We hung out sometimes." Strong said, "He crashed here sometimes, and he was just a joy to be around. He was a great kid, he was a dear friend, and a drag performer who loved karaoke. No matter where he goes, I'm sure he is singing," said Ricardo Nairos. Blake said when he was working as a bouncer at Geo's nightclub and bar in 2009. Yablonski was a performer there and went by the name Kerri O'Kee. He just talked to you and he was very captivating. He kept your attention and always had these stories to tell and always wanted to find the perfect mate, his soulmate and the love of his life, and just be happy in love. Blake said he still remembers meeting Yablonski for the first time. Blank was on the patio at Geo's when Yablonski came outside dressed in full drag. He comes out on the patio and looks around at everybody, Blake recalled, adding that Yablonski then turned to the crowd and said, "Man, can I please, somebody, give me a cigarette?" So I handed him one and he was like, "You are a peach player and a plum." I was like, "That is awesome." Steven was born in Gimli, Manitoba on March 22nd in 1986 and grew up in Fraserwood, Manitoba. He attended the Fisher Branch early years school for 3 years, then later the Gimli early/middle years school and Gimli High School, where he graduated. After graduation, he worked at Gimli Super A Foods and had various other jobs. He then moved to Winnipeg, where he eventually worked at Pizza Hut, always taking any opportunity to make life better. Stephen was always outgoing and full of life. He was a true entertainer. He especially loved to sing and dance whenever he could. He attended the International Peace Gardens World Youth Day in Toronto and Brandon Jazz Festival when he was still in school. He also loved to be involved in the church and with others, doing everything from altar serving to teaching catechism to playing the trumpet in the youth band. He was a good model. Stephen also attended the St. Malo Roman Catholic camp with Eric Zalevich, where they enjoyed their faith through music. Stephen always loved to have a good time and to be around family and friends. He touched people's lives wherever he went and lived life to the fullest. Stephen's hugs and kisses will be greatly missed by all. Robert Gene Clark, aka Quick, so fondly remembered for his wit, humor, and his unique way of spinning a story or joke, and his special way in which he greeted each and every friend along life's highway. Clark was a welder by trade and also a convicted drug trafficker who made headlines while trying to get Canadian citizenship. A friend of the man nicknamed Quick deserves to be remembered. He was probably the most easygoing guy I've ever met in my entire life, said Bert Royer, who's a close friend of Clark's. He was a business manager for the Ironworks Local 771 Union in Regina. Clark, a welder in Esterhazy, Saskatchewan, was a union member. Royer said Clark was a divorced father of 2 adult daughters who lived outside Canada. Royer said his friend only recently at that time obtained a Canadian passport after his public fight for citizenship in 2007. Clark took on Citizenship and Immigration Canada as a border baby who fell through the cracks and ended up facing a deportation order. Clark's parents lived in Lyleton, Manitoba in the late 1940s, and according to the federal documents, drove 16 kilometers across the border to the nearest hospital in West Hope, North Dakota for Robert's birth. He grew up in Manitoba, assuming he was a Canadian citizen. Decades later, Clark was jailed for drug trafficking and booze smuggling. After discovering his parents had filled out the wrong forms years before, he was served a deportation order after his conviction because he was labeled a foreign national. The deportation order was eventually put on hold, Royer said. His friend finally got his Canadian passport. So a couple interesting fellows here. One of them was a drag performer in the city in Winnipeg. The other one looked like he had, gotten himself in a bit of trouble. And to make matters worse, it turned out that he was an American citizen. Now, some people might be wondering, well, I'd love to be an American citizen. What's the problem here? They tell you're an American citizen and you're upset, wouldn't you? Isn't that, kind of like realizing you hit the lottery? In his case, I'm sure that they probably wanted him to be an American citizen for the benefits that that could provide when his parents may have did that, be it intentionally or unintentionally. But when you're in the legal system, that means that you're going to get deported and go to American prison. And American prison is much different than Canadian prison is. And most would rather serve their time in a Canadian prison than an American facility. So he fought to get his Canadian passport and he was able to do so. The man was a welder. He was living out of Saskatchewan. And, paths would be crossed. So the bathhouse was a meeting place for men and women, but primarily men and sex workers to engage in casual sex. Aquarius is a co-ed bathhouse that's on 4 nights of the week, including weekends. The club opened up in 2001 and claims to be the first co-ed bathhouse of its kind in Canada. Visitors at the bathhouse frequently roam throughout the building to socialize with each other and have sex in the bedrooms there. According to Elia McIver, a regular customer who wasn't there when the fire broke out, the place is packed on co-ed nights. She calls Aquarius quiet, clean, and respectable, but adds, people smoke in there even though they're not supposed to, Pang says, and his staff do what they can to keep patrons from smoking and drinking in the bathhouse. We try to do everything professionally, but we can only do so much. The fire broke out at 7 a.m. on the second floor of the 12,000 square foot facility. However, homicide investigators led the investigation and were working to identify suspects in the days following the fire. The Winnipeg Fire Paramedics Service said the business did not have a centralized fire alarm that would have quickly alerted first responders that a fire was in progress there. City records showed the bathhouse having 20 therapy rooms, plus a sauna, a steam room, and washrooms, but the business was advertising it had about 45 rooms for clients on its website. The fire began about 7 a.m. on the second floor of the 2-story building, which includes an upstairs suite. One man was found dead at the scene, and the other was conveyed to hospital in critical condition and died shortly after. The building formerly trained Taekwondo students. It was remodeled into a bathhouse. It served men only on Tuesdays and Thursdays and was co-ed on other days. So this is an incident where a fire broke out. There wasn't really any sprinklers, and by the sound of it, it looked suspicious enough that homicide launched an investigation immediately following the incident. Two people lost their lives. One of them died in the fire. The other lived through the fire but subsequently died of their injuries. On the night of the fire, the Aquarius Bathhouse had a co-ed evening where people went to socialize and have sex. Like most small towns, the best crowd is on the weekends. It advertised on a website. It also advertised a bondage room. The fire is being considered suspicious, said a police spokesman. The building is on the north side of Notre Dame between Gertie and Harriet Streets near the Balmoral Hotel. A tenant in an apartment across the street witnessed the fire. I heard glass breaking. It was a pretty big show, just blazing, said the tenant. Early damage estimates are $300,000 to the building and $200,000 to the contents. The fire was contained to the second floor. The owner of the bathhouse, Somchai Pengfarskas, told CBC News the business met all the fire codes and was inspected by the city after he renovated it 3 years ago. Pengfarskas said he's angry about the arson and can't understand why anyone would want to burn down his business deliberately, but he said he thinks he has an idea who might have started the fire. Staff and customers told him they saw two patrons, men, who appeared to be in their 20s, acting suspiciously, he said. When the fire broke out, Pengfarskas said he was told one of the men was seen running from the bathhouse to a car. Pengfarskas gave surveillance footage taken by cameras mounted outside the bathhouse to investigators. Pengfarskas declined to be more specific in describing the men people saw. I don't know how they could do it, he said. They have no heart. They must be really bad people. Pengfarskas said he's relieved people now know that he wasn't responsible for the fire. The bathhouse owner, Somchai Pengfarskas, lost another business to arson in 1999, the King and Alexander steam baths. So a deadly fire at the Winnipeg bathhouse was allegedly started by a customer who was angry to learn he'd had a sexual tryst with a man he thought was actually a woman. So a young man went to a bathhouse on a co-ed night, and obviously there was some type of sexual contact that took place, and the man was not of the understanding, or wasn't disclosed to him, that the individual that he was engaged with in these activities was in fact another man. So basically, family members are talking about, one of the individuals, and, he thought it was a woman. It's a 25-year-old Winnipeg man, Justin James Rosdobutko. And I'm not pronouncing many of these names correctly, I'm sure, but this is who was charged with 2 counts of manslaughter over the deaths of Steven Yablonski and Robert Clark in the arson fire at the Aquarius Bathhouse. He just needed a place to crash that night because he had a fight with his partner. So he slept at Aquarius Bathhouse, said Ricardo Medeiros. Steven Yablonski, 23, was asleep when fire broke out at the Aquarius men's bathhouse around 7 a.m. Sunday, says his father, Robert. Steven Yablonski was 23. He died of smoke inhalation in a fire at Aquarius Bathhouse. Winnipeg police have said the fire had been deliberately set. At the time, Constable Jason McKelson told reporters it didn't appear the two men had been targeted, and there was no indication the fire was a hate crime. 2 weeks later, Justin James Rosdobutko, 25, was charged with 2 counts of manslaughter. Aquarius owner Somchai Pengfarskux told CBC News the accused had rented a room in the bathhouse on the night the fire broke out. Rosdobutko was at the bathhouse with a companion on the morning of the fire, but that other person has not been charged. The lead investigator, Kevin Ross, said one large fire was set in public. Secondary blazes began at the building. The fact there were 2 points of origin made it clear this was a deliberate act. DNA testing on a cigarette butt found in the room where the bed was set afire contained a mixed profile of 2 people, jurors were told. Rosdobutko's DNA was not in the profile, but his friend's was. The trial began February 2014, but the judge declared a mistrial after new evidence came forward about what caused the 2 fires at issue in the case. Queen's Bench Justice Doug Aber abruptly pulled the plug on the trial, saying going further could be dangerous to the administration of justice. Specifically, lawyers had previously agreed the deadly blaze was caused by arson, and the only question was whether the accused was responsible. But the entire tone of the case changed late Tuesday when the lead investigator was repeatedly questioned by defense lawyer Todd Bourchier about the possibility the fire was started accidentally. This came as a surprise to both the Crown and the judge. That was an acknowledged fact. The only thing we were arguing about is who set the fire, Prosecutor Dean Sahuka told the court. She said the Crown's case would have proceeded much differently if not for the pretrial agreement. For example, several additional witnesses would have been called and much more time would have been required than the scheduled 9 days. The damage has already been done, Aber said. He accused the defense of changing horses in midstream and said the only remedy was starting over with a new jury. It could be many months, even a year or longer before that occurs. Rosdobutko remained free on bail at the time. Rosdobutko's lawyer, Todd Bourchier, told CBC his client has been dealing with the case for 4.5 years. He had really hoped to have this behind him at this point and to be able to sort of move forward, said Bourchier. He always maintained his innocence. He always maintained he didn't have any involvement in these fires whatsoever. He's not happy about how much time it's taken to resolve this case, Bourchier added, but he does understand why it's necessary to have all the information before us before we can really proceed to trial. Neither the Crown nor Bourchier would comment on why it's taken so long to get to trial. David Wilward, a law professor at the University of Manitoba, says it's difficult to tell what is causing the case delays. This really seems unusual to me, but maybe it's arson mixed with manslaughter. I mean, the question really is who started the fire, Millward said. As far as arsons go, this really shouldn't be going on for 4 or 5 years. Millward noted that it's a charter right for a person to be tried for a crime within a reasonable period of time. At the same time, he said, even with respect to that chartered right, the police and Crown will be given some latitude if the case itself is highly complex. So, this is being dragged out in court. It doesn't even seem like it's started. It's gone anywhere, and it's been 4.5 years at that time. One of the witnesses is saying, we had been out all night, and I don't know, we just decided to go there. This is what Randy Soper had said. He said they went downstairs into the locker room area and changed into towels. They checked out several rooms on the main floor of the facility, but eventually became separated. A little later on, I ran back into him. He was upset, said the friend of the defendant. So the friend claims Rosdobutko told him he had met someone he believed to be a woman, only to discover it was a transvestite. He felt that he'd been tricked. I guess anybody would be upset by that, the defendant's friend said. The two men returned downstairs to get changed back into their street clothes. Suddenly people began yelling about a fire on the main floor. It was a total panic to get out. I've never been in a fire before, said the friend. He and Rosdobutko fled the facility and stood outside for several minutes, watching the blaze. He said Rosdobutko was initially interviewed by police as a witness. The investigation changed once the friend gave his statement to investigators. I'm just so confused, so stressed, said the friend, who hasn't talked to Rosdobutko since he was arrested. I just can't see him doing this. I've known him for such a long time, he said. So, the friend was there. He corroborates that, him and his buddy were there. He doesn't really go into depth as to their nature of their relationship or what they were doing in this bathhouse. He states basically that he told me that he hooked up with what he thought was a woman. It turned out that it was a man. He was highly upset, but that he didn't really see him do anything, and he'd be highly surprised if he had did anything. He's known him for a long time apparently, so they might just have been friends who went down there to kind of do their thing, I guess. Randy Soper testified he and Justin Rosdobutko had just fled an early morning fire at Aquarius Men's Bath. When minutes later, Rosdobutko told him, I started this. He was upset following a sexual encounter with another attendee, jurors heard. A witness testified last week he attended the bathhouse in drag and made a sexual overture at Rosdobutko, who lost interest when he said nothing was going to happen. Soper said when he asked Rosdobutko why he set the fire, he told him he was upset that he had received a hand job from a cross-dresser. It's crazy. It's crazy. You're moving in these type of situations. I don't know. I don't know what goes on at these establishments, but unfortunately, he found himself in a bit of a predicament. I was in disbelief and shocked, Soper said. Soper said he had been drinking and watching sports at Rosdobutko's home earlier that evening when they made a mutual decision to visit the bathhouse. It was just something to do that night, he said. Soper, who identified himself as heterosexual, said he had no intention of engaging in sexual activity at the bathhouse and had made an agreement with Rosdobutko not to separate. Soper said he and Rosdobutko were sharing a cigarette in one of the building's bedrooms when Rosdobutko said, we should burn this place down, and briefly held a pillow over the cigarette. I thought he was just messing around, Soper said. I didn't think he was being serious about anything. Defense lawyer Todd Boissier suggested Soper visited the bathhouse at the request of Rosdobutko, a frequent attendee, and argued if anyone was going to be upset or surprised at the sexual activity, it would be Soper, not the accused. Under cross-examination, Soper admitted telling police he was upset after he and Rosdobutko had become separated and a man offered to perform a sex act on him. You're pissed off and angry because he broke off an agreement to stay together, Boissier said. From what I'm hearing, the only one who had a reason to be upset was you. So I'm not sure. I mean, the defense is kind of trying to point the finger at the friend. It doesn't sound like they're ready to concede that the client had anything really to do with the fire. So both of these guys are in essence kind of pointing the finger at each other. So Justin Rosdobutko has maintained for years that the police got the wrong guy. The jury has seemingly agreed, and they found him not guilty of setting the deadly 2009 fire inside a Winnipeg bathhouse. Rosdobutko is 31. He was acquitted on Wednesday afternoon of 2 counts of manslaughter and walked out of court a free man. The jurors reached their verdict after only about 30 minutes of deliberations. It's probably one of the quickest results I've ever seen in Manitoba, defense lawyer Todd Boissier said outside the court. He has always said that he wasn't the one who did this. My client is ecstatic with the result. It has been a long process. There was no doubt it was arson that killed 2 men inside the Aquarius Men's Bathhouse on Notre Dame Avenue, but the key question was whether the right man was on trial. There was no forensic evidence tying Rosdobutko to the crime. All justice officials had an opportunity, a possible motive, and a key witness against Rosdobutko in the form of a longtime friend who went out with him the night of the incident. But Bosse suggested it was Soper who may have set the fire. The man has a prior criminal record, was intoxicated, and admits only going with Rosdobutko that night at his friend's urging. Soper told jurors he was extremely uncomfortable in the bathhouse and lied to police in his initial statement, saying he didn't know what happened. So Rosdobutko is clear. He's clear and free of this thing. Period. You can never ask him about it ever again. He beat it. The question remains of Soper, the guy that he went there with. He pointed the finger to begin with at Rosdobutko in a sense. Now people are kind of questioning if perhaps it was him. So, Soper did tell the jurors he was uncomfortable. He did lie, but they just said, what, he's not credible and he's not reliable. His evidence doesn't stand up to scrutiny, Forster said in his closing arguments. He's trying to whitewash the evidence to make himself look good. There's nothing but doubt here. There's nothing but questions. Jurors clearly agreed. Rosdobutko was accused of setting 2 separate fires in the building early that morning. The Crown only called 6 witnesses, including a fire investigation expert who detailed exactly how the crime occurred. Rosdobutko has been free on bail since shortly after his arrest. The case dragged through the system so long because of delays that included the first attempt at the trial ending in a mistrial due to issues with the fire investigators' evidence. The evidence speaks for itself. They, the jurors, certainly weren't satisfied with the Crown's case, Forster said Wednesday. The Crown had argued Soper's initial hesitation to speak with police was an attempt to protect the friend he's known since junior high school. The owner of the bathhouse where 2 men died in a blaze last fall did get fined for a number of fire code violations. Fire officials aren't saying the violations contributed to the deaths. Charges for 15 fire code violations were laid against the owner after they conducted a review following the blaze. The violations include several things: improper use of electrical cords, fire doors that weren't closing and latching properly. The owner of the bathhouse, he pled guilty in court and was fined more than $11,000. Peng says he didn't know the proper rules and since made upgrades. Clue said the building is in the final stages of meeting the requirements and the fire prevention branch has closed its case. I think the amount of fines is low in light of the fact that 2 people lost their lives, said Cluse, who's the fire investigator. We may never know who caused the fire or why. We do know that it was set intentionally, and to this day, whoever intentionally set that fire killed 2 people and has not been brought to justice. So was this an act of so-called gay panic, where an individual reacts violently upon discovery that they have engaged in a sexual act with someone who is no longer identifying as their assigned gender? Was it an incel-style lashing out in sexual frustration as a result of being left hanging, so to speak, by a sexual partner who was withholding gratification? Based on security footage, it does seem that perhaps at least one of these 2 men set that fire. The jury came back as close to immediately as can be recognized by a court in saying that they didn't believe Justin Rosdobutko to be the one who was responsible. The message that they seemed to send, that perhaps, as the defense lawyer claimed, Randy Soper may have allegedly been the responsible party behind the arson and put his story onto Justin Rosdobutko. They may have both been involved, but we will never know. The police charged the party who didn't cooperate with them. And what happens when the guy who did it tells on somebody else and the police believe the actual perpetrator because they're the one essentially snitching? The case was thin regardless of who they charged, and they went with what they saw as the stronger case. With Googling Aquarius, it appears to be a nondescript door that many of us have driven past countless times and never realized it was even there. Similar to a proctology appointment, people generally have a skeptical view of the explanations people have for going there. What could be learned from this situation? In the case of Steven Yablonski, he was doing nothing wrong in the sense that he was just living in his truth. Openly a drag performer and doing what he enjoyed in life, not hiding who he felt that he was from anyone, including his church members. Robert Gene Clark likely surprised many of those close to him on the circumstances surrounding his whereabouts at the time of his death. Steve was asleep, which is at least a mercy in some ways. Robert was trapped and choking, a much worse way to go. He may have been wondering what his kids will think in his final moments. Everything he was going to leave behind. There sounds like there may have been some naivety on the part of the perpetrator of the arson and the apparent lack of discernment between a trans female and a biological female, and further naivety in their lack of awareness to their surroundings and the crowd they were among. None of that excuses torching a building full of people. Somebody has clearly got away with murder. When you go to these type of places, you should expect those type of things to happen as far as cross-dressers. If you're not into that, you are the one who needs to confirm gender and gender identity of your partner. If you fail to do so, simply take the lesson of be careful with that in those type of places and go home. There is no need to attempt to murder 40 innocent people in a horrific way, as nobody should get suffocated in smoke. In the event that someone does choose to commit such a heinous act, then we need to step up for the victims and find means to bring someone to justice. It would seem to us, and to many of us I should say, that the DNA on the cigarette that caused the fire is pretty strong evidence, but ultimately we will see if anything the Crown prosecutors do plan on doing with this case will identify those DNA profiles at some point in the future. Are they even trying? Do they even have the cigarette butts anymore, and so on and so forth? It seems unlikely. So somebody, could be your neighbor, could be your brother, could be one of these two guys, it could be whoever, is walking around knowing that they killed these two innocent people, and nobody knows. Winnipegology.